Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video, we are going to be looking at some important quotations according to the theme and character for the novel The White Tiger. Now, there are obviously loads of great quotations that you can study, that you can memorize and include in your essay. I've just picked out a couple of my favorites that I want to talk to you about and go through which character they refer to, which theme they refer to, and how they can really elevate a paragraph that's based on that theme or character that's connected to the argument you're trying to prove. So before we get into some of these different quotations from the White Tiger, let's just quickly discuss what an ideal quote is to study and to include in your essay. So an ideal quote is somewhere between 5 to 8 words long. It needs to be something that is distinctive, so not something that's just sort of that you could say in a very pedestrian way. It needs to be distinctive, it needs to be memorable directly from the text, obviously. A good quote is not going to have too many pronouns in it because you want to integrate it quite seamlessly into your answer. I do have a whole video on how to integrate quotes. I definitely suggest you have a look at that before making your quotes list and studying it. Remember, if you are making a quotes list, make sure that your quotes are versatile, that you can use them not just for maybe one character, but for one character and a variety of themes perhaps, or even multiple characters, so that you are learning one quote, but it can help you in multiple different situations. So in this video, we've got some long quotes. You don't have to study the whole thing. You can just decide what aspect of the quote maybe you'd like to study. There also are some quotes with pronouns that may be in the wrong tense as well. But you can pick and choose what you think is going to serve your purposes best. Everyone has a slightly different style, but I definitely suggest you watch the video on how to integrate quotes because that's one of the most important factors in scoring well in your literature essay. So let's get into the characters, the themes, and the matching quotations. So first we've got our main character, Balram. So I'm just going to go through the quotes and explain to you how they connect to him. If anyone knows the truth about Bangalore, it's me. So we hear this whole story from Balram's perspective, and I think it's fair to say he's quite an unreliable narrator, but he certainly thinks a lot of himself, and he does think that he knows the truth, and he can paint a picture of being born into a lower caste in India, what that means for your life, what that means for your destiny, what it means to be an entrepreneur. And he's quite interesting as a narrator because, yes, he's certainly unreliable the way he defends all of his actions and paints himself as being, in the right the whole time. Even when he's in the wrong, he paints himself as being in the right. But what's really interesting about him is he gives a voice to a group of people that are usually voiceless. He gives a perspective, he gives a story that is not often told. Usually you have the people in positions of power telling the story, talking about politics, saying how things are, even commenting on the working class people. But here you have someone who's actually come up from those lower classes into the upper classes, and so he feels that he has this great perspective to give about India. And obviously this whole book is written as sort of this letter or this message to the Chinese premier, and his story is supposed to be emblematic of an ordinary Indian person's life and life trajectory. I don't just swear and curse, I'm a man of action and change. This is very true about Balram. He doesn't just sit quietly and accept his fate, accept his destiny. He is a man of action and change. He claims he's a self-taught entrepreneur, which is theoretically true. He has taught himself all the skills he needs to build a business and to be a man of action and change. You, young man, are an intelligent, honest, vivacious fellow in this crowd of thugs and idiots. In any jungle, what is the rarest of animals? The creature that comes along only once in a generation. So this is where we get the title of our book and also the name of Balram's taxi company at the end of the story, The White Tiger. The white tiger is a rare animal, comes about once in a generation, is something exquisite, something different, something special and unique, and that's what Balram is told that he is when he's young, and he really clutches onto this idea that he is different. that he is unique, that he deserves a better life, and he manifests that and makes that a reality. He just stood there gaping at the fort, just the way his mother used to. He is going to come to nothing good in life. So Balram's family, we see that his grandmother does not have a good perspective on his mother. She wants Balram to work so that he can make money for the family and send back paychecks as is traditional. His father does want more for him. We're going to discuss that a little bit more. But we see over here Balram acting differently as a child, staring at the sport, looking beyond what other people are looking at. So we see that sort of element of being the white tiger. It looked like the most beautiful sight on earth, sort of relaying that point again. He claims he's not an original thinker, but an original listener. And this is one of Balram's strengths and part of the reason he gets to be where he gets to actually do things that he does and move away and advance in society, is that he listens. So when he's working at the tea room, he's listening to conversations. When he first gets to Bangalore, he is listening to conversations, understanding what the lay of the land is, understanding what he needs to do in order to succeed in that environment. And so, as much as he's a man of action and change, he's also a very, very keen observer and listener, and that's what leads to his success. From the darkness to Delhi. So we have this metaphor constantly of comparing India to having dark sides and light sides, in the sense that the darkness is sort of working class environment, lower caste born into that environment, and that's where Balram's from. And then Delhi and the light is sort of seen as where the upper class people live their lives, which is a totally different sort of reality. It's almost like they exist in two very separate bubbles. And Balram has this opportunity to go into Delhi when he's working as a driver, and he gets to be within that different bubble within the light for a little bit, and eventually he makes the light his reality. He makes himself into this entrepreneur who gets to sit under a chandelier and run a company. So Balram thinks of himself and he reflects on his journey as coming from the darkness to Delhi and later, different places, but from the darkness to the light. That's how he perceives his journey. And we see that in this quote where he says, "You are listening to the story of a social entrepreneur, sir." So, social entrepreneur, that's a really interesting phrasing, because entrepreneur, obviously, someone who creates a business, but social entrepreneur, he has become socially mobile in the sense that he is changed his class within his lifetime, which some people, well, for most people, they don't tend to change their class. They're not able to do that. But Balram's able to lift himself out of this poverty and servitude into a life where he is the boss and he is running things. My life had been written away. I was to go to jail for a killing I had not done. I was in terror, and yet not once did the thought of running away cross my mind. Not once did the thought, "I'll tell the judge the truth," cross my mind. I was trapped in the rooster coop. So this is a very good example to show this idea of class in this society that Balram is living within. He is forced sort of to take on the responsibility of killing this person on the street, when in reality it was his boss who rode over this person. And Balram is going to sort of take responsibility for this. And what he's saying over here is using the metaphor of the rooster coop, of how people of this certain class in India, it's not even crossing their minds that they need to go against the upper classes. In this case, he is being blamed for something that's not his fault. He doesn't even think of running away. So it's almost like this class disparity and the expectations of servants has been indoctrinated within the society for generations, and there's not even a thought in people's minds to change that, even though it's totally unreasonable and totally crazy to think about sort of going to jail, giving your life away for your master, not even, your family or something, but for your master. So it's talking about this level of indoctrination and the level of just tradition that has kept 99.9% of people in the society responsible or controlled by the 0.1%. I was looking for the keys for years, but the door was always open. So obviously, this is from Balram's perspective, and the story, he's reflecting on his life, he's reflecting on his past, so he's thinking a lot. But one of his strengths is he doesn't stop thinking. So even when he's doing sort of mindless jobs, even when he's being told what is expected of him, not even just being told, but understanding what his caste signifies, what he's allowed to do in the society, all those verbal and non-verbal sort of instructions, he's still um, is thinking, and he's still scheming, and he's still wondering why it has to be that way. Is there another way that he can live? And so here, he's commenting that actually there is this opportunity. He's always finding opportunities. So a strength of Balram is he's not prone to hopelessness. He's rather opportunistic. He's going to find an opportunity, find a glimmer of hope that he's going to chase. A white tiger keeps no friends. It's too dangerous. So he doesn't have too many friends, and we can see that sort of in the literal sense, but also beyond that is that he works by himself, and he is self-interested, individualistic, and he's worried about his own trajectory in life. All I wanted was the chance to be a man, and for that, one murder was enough. So here we can see the extent of class disparity and how for Balram being a servant means that he can't even be a man. And obviously this is not talking about the literal form of a man, but the figurative association of what a man implies is sort of a person with honor, with self-respect. And so for Balram, he doesn't see his life as being a servant as him encompassing honor, self-respect. And so for him, the price of murdering his boss is actually going to be okay. So this is how he's sort of going to justify it in his mind, but it also shows us the extent of the class disparity and how Balram is a product of that and how he's trying to fight against it. Is that the right way to go against it? Perhaps not. But we can see sort of his mindset, how he thinks about things, how he thinks about the world. So this quote gives us a great insight into the character of Balram and what's going on in his mind. He claims that he's a first gear man, so he believes himself to be quite a good person, quite a good man in terms of his skill, in terms of his morality. He paints himself as, a figure who did what he had to do in order to be a man, in order to get out of this life of servitude. Obviously, whether that's the case or not, well, that's up for debate, and there's a lot of moral ambiguity in this story. What he did was wrong. Killing a man is wrong. But hearing from his perspective makes us question a lot of things about his society and his context, which makes it an interesting read. I'm always a man who sees tomorrow when others see today. So this is reference to the fact that he's different, he's unique, he's special, he's this white tiger in the society, and whether he is or not is up for debate, but he definitely perceives himself to be that. I think the key word with Balram is perceive, because we're seeing it from his perspective. As we said, he's pretty unreliable as a narrator, but he perceives himself in a certain way, and that's what evidence we have to use in our essay is these quotes, and it's his perception of himself and his perception of the world. And sometimes his perceptions change, especially when it comes to different characters, especially when it refers to his boss. He does change his mind about his perception. So that's also interesting to track. I think the Rooster Coop needs people like me to break out of it. It needs masters like Mr. Ashok, who, for all his numerous virtues, was not much of a master, to be weeded out, and exceptional servants like me to replace them. Like I said previously for the analysis of the previous quote, same sort of idea. Thinks of himself quite honorably. He thinks that he's done something good to represent the people who he represents, right? Those lower class people who are born into lower classes, who have this sort of indoctrination of the Rooster Coop of staying put in that position, staying disempowered. And he thinks that he's done them a duty by breaking out of this. And he says someone like Mr. Ashok, his boss, was not needed or needed to be weeded out, that he actually sort of is going to fulfill this role of being in a powerful position better. Like we said, he changes his mind about Mr. Ashok quite a bit. I've switched sides. I am now one of those who cannot be caught in India. So Balram undergoes massive transformation in this story. He starts with the story when he's growing up, in terms of chronologically. He starts off being quite innocent, quite naive, perhaps. And then as he grows up and he has to deal with the realities of the world and this corrupt system, he becomes more and more corrupt himself. First, it goes into his mind, perhaps. His mind becomes corrupted, and it changes. His viewpoints change, and then his actions start to become corrupted as well. He kills Mr. Ashok. He, starts the taxi company. We see how he deals with an issue with the taxi company as he's writing the book or the letter to the Chinese premier. And so we can see his transformation in that way. We also see his transformation from someone who's incredibly powerless and voiceless to someone who cannot be caught in India. So the people who he used to, fear, and the people who caused him a lot of pain or a lot of suffering, or his father lots of suffering when he was younger, or just, the system that caused him suffering, he has now become a part of that system. So he's elevated himself into that position of power. And what's interesting about Balram is, I think, when we usually think about the hero of a story, they're not just going to change their own life, they might change, well, they should be changing, some inequality or corruption for everyone. And Balram doesn't do that because he realizes that the system is so incredibly corrupt. What he does instead is he serves himself and he makes himself a part of that system. So he's not going to change the system, he rather works within the system. And that's where we get that moral ambiguity, because he understands and he expresses that this system is broken, but he works within it to get what he needs. So in that way, is he sort of a typical hero? Perhaps not. And that could theoretically be an essay question or something you need to be thinking about. Is he a hero? Is he a heroic figure? Is he a true protagonist or not? Or what makes a true hero? What makes a true protagonist? Something to think about. Even if they make me walk the wooden stairs to the hangman's noose, I'll never say I made a mistake that night in Delhi when I slit my master's throat. I'll say it was all worthwhile to know, just for a day, just for an hour, just for a minute, what it means not to be a servant. So he does not regret killing Ashok. He believes that this is what was important for him. This is what he needed, the start he needed in life in order to become a successful entrepreneur, in order to change his reality. And so he claims that he doesn't have any regret for his actions. Right, next we have Ashok. Mr. Ashok was a classic first gear man, so from Balram's perspective, he really respects Ashok, especially at the beginning of their time together. But he does realize that he is weak, helpless, absent-minded, and completely unprotected by the usual instincts that run the blood of a landlord. So Ashok is the son of Stork, one of the major landlords in Balram's hometown, and he has been off in America. He comes back to India when the business is in trouble, and now he's involved in all these meetings and all these bribes being arranged. But he does struggle to sort of adjust to the world of India again after being away, and we can see that he's very different to his father and also very different to his brother, who's nicknamed the Mongoose. Then his madness was over. He covered his face in his hands and began to sob. Because of the master-servant relationship, Balram sees a very human side to Ashok that, maybe a master wouldn't share with anyone else, but because there's such a strange sort of way that these masters don't really see their servants as being equal to them, as being the same sort of level of person as them, they are able to sort of be vulnerable because they don't sort of respect their opinion that much. And so here we can see after his marriage breaks down, Balram is able to see Ashok completely sort of dissolve and completely collapse out of sadness and out of anger. Whatever anger I had against him for trying to pin Pinky Madame's hit and run killing on me passed away that evening. That was her fault. Mr. Ashok had nothing to do with it. I forgave him entirely. I talked to him about the wisdom of my village, half repeating things I remembered Granny saying, and half making things up on the spot. And he nodded. So here we see that connection and how the master-servant relationship is incredibly unique, because as much as Ashok is his master, is Balram's master, and is going to tell him what to do, and literally just before that, Balram was going to go to jail to protect his wife from being arrested for hit and run killing. now he's seeing the humanity in Ashok, and he's comforting him, he's helping him. So it's this very strange relationship, master servant, because everyone, it's sort of they're holding each other at a distance, but at the same time, there isn't a distance, there is such close proximity. So we see over here that Balram's perspective on Ashok is very, very kind, very forgiving for a man that was willing to sell him off into jail. But obviously, that's going to alter and shift when Balram starts to think about all the things that Ashok has taken from him, which we'll discuss a little bit later when we get to that theme. All I get to do in Delhi, take money out of banks and bribe people. So this is Ashok not very satisfied with life in India, working for his father and working with his brother. He doesn't really enjoy this much. Pinky Madame, I'd never heard of a woman leaving a husband for good. I mean, yes, on TV, but not in real life. So coming from America, she has a very different opinion of how things go, very different culture, obviously, America versus India. So she struggles in Delhi to adjust to life and the different way of doing things. And she's an interesting character for Balram to interact with. And he starts to understand different dynamics a little bit more, and also the idea of American culture, which is going to be important, because we're going to learn at the end when he starts his business, his entrepreneurial pursuit in Bangalore. It's all about the American economy, so we've got that exposure to American culture from Pinky Madame. But also an education for Balram in terms of, now being in Delhi, how things are different to his country, to his rural life back home. So he learns a lot of important things from the other drivers, but also from his interactions with Pinky Madame. The Mongoose. So this is Ashok's brother. Finally, I took a rupee coin out of my shirt pocket, dropped it on the floor of the car, picked it up and gave it to the Mongoose. Ashok is very trustworthy of Balram. He's from our hometown, we can trust him. The Mongoose is always skeptical of him. And here he accuses Balram of stealing from him. And Balram's on his hands and he's looking in the car for this rupee coin, which he didn't steal. And eventually he just literally takes a rupee coin of his own and pretends to find it to give it to the Mongoose, because the Mongoose won't rest and has accused him of stealing. So we can see the power dynamics at play here, because a rupee to the Mongoose is really nothing, whereas to Balram it actually means something. And so this is just a power play, really putting Balram in his place as a servant. The Mongoose is always telling Ashok off for treating him sort of too kindly. Next we have Balram's father. My father was a poor man, but he was a man of honor and courage. I wouldn't be here under the chandelier if not for his guidance. My father's spine was a knotted rope. The story of a poor man's life is written on his body in sharp pen. I was his plan. My whole life I have been treated like a donkey. All I want is that one son of mine, at least one, should live like a man. So Balram's father was a rickshaw driver, very physical job, very low-paying job, and we see over here that Balram has incredible gratitude for him. We see Balram's father had big plans for him, really wanted him to succeed in life, and Balram obviously does this, obviously not in the traditional way though. So here we can see Balram's father, we can contrast that with Balram's life, and we can see then the urgency and the desperation Balram has not to have the same life as his father, and how his father was a victim and a product of his circumstances, of this inequality, of the class disparity of the society that was so prevalent and pervasive. And so it acts as an interesting foil to Balram's journey and what he becomes, as opposed to what his father achieved in his life, or what he struggled to achieve, what he couldn't achieve despite his best efforts. He was sort of restricted by the rooster coop. So next we have Ram Persad, and he is the original driver who works for the family before Balram comes. But there's always this fierce competition between them, and so they have this competition even with the number of gods that they have in the room, because they're sharing a room. And so Balram makes sure that he has the same amount of gods as him so that they're even. And Balram's always looking out, trying to get Ram's job, trying to be the first class or the first choice driver. And Balram ultimately brings Ram's tenure as the driver or even as the worker for the family to his demise, because he starts noticing that Ram has started to head out the house at the same time every evening, and it's revealed that Ram is practicing Islam, which the family is prejudiced towards, and so they dismiss him. So we can see that Balram is, not going to worry about others in his pursuit of dominance, in his pursuit of money and status. He will do whatever it takes in order to be that first choice driver, and ultimately he's going to do whatever it takes in order to escape this life of servitude altogether. So let's talk about some setting quotes. India's two countries in one, an India of light and an India of darkness. So we spoke about this earlier a little bit, about how we use this metaphor, this imagery of light and darkness within India to show these completely two different sides of the country. We have some of the country living in, in wealth and status and power, in the light. And then we also have this India of darkness, which is embodied by the rooster coop, where people are restricted by their caste, by a certain predetermined destiny in their lives, how they, are living lives that are riddled by corruption and very powerless situation. They don't feel like they have a voice, don't feel like they can change much, so they just have to sort of lean into what their destiny has been, manifested as. The one infallible law of life in the darkness is that good news becomes bad news, and soon. So quite a pessimistic perspective and reality. To break the law of his land, to turn bad news into good news, is the entrepreneur's prerogative. So this is what we see. Entrepreneurship for Balram is something that's incredibly multifaceted. He sees it in a number of different ways. This is, it's not just that classic definition of building a business and running your own company. It's so much more than that, and it's representative and symbolic of this light and darkness, good news, bad news. That's my case to my destiny. So this is what the sort of thing in his mind was always building to be. This is what Balram thinks, or what his family has told him, and what the society has told him, but he's on a mission to change that. I suppose you are meant to drive on the left side of the road, but until then I'd never known anyone to get agitated over this rule. So we can just see driving in certain places in India during this time, the rules are not really they're not really followed, not really even known. So we can just see this setting that we're living in, where there's corruption, where rules are not really being followed, where things are just done as they want to be done. And this is obviously Balram's perspective of this within this story. The president's house was covered in smog and blotted out from the road. It seemed as though there were no government in Delhi that day. This is such an interesting quote because the house is covered in smog of this powerful president. But the idea that Balram's saying over here is that there didn't seem to be like the house in Delhi because it was covered in smog, but actually also that's representative. There doesn't seem to be a government in Delhi because there's so much bribery, so much corruption, so much underhanded politics taking place, that it doesn't seem like there is truly a government, because the government is responsible for its people, it's trying to help its people, it's trying to govern fairly, instate laws, regulate laws, maintain laws. And so Balram is commenting here, there doesn't actually seem to be a government, there just seems to be corruption. Two kinds of people use these machines: the children of the rich, or the fully grown adults of the poorer class, who remain all their lives children. This is a very interesting idea. So this is talking about the sort of gambling or games machines by the train station. And Balram observes, remember he's a great observer, he notices that the people who use them are the children of rich adults, so who have some cheap, some money to spend. For them it's quite a cheap sort of fun activity. Also, who else uses them? The fully grown adults of the poorer class. So those who don't really have a ton of money to spare, but they're gambling, they're trying to see what they can get, and they're playing these games. And he comments that they remain children all their lives. And this is linking back to this idea that he's willing to commit murder in order to become a man. So it's this idea that being a servant or being part of this certain class means that you don't have that honor or respect, or at least that's his perception of it. And so he sees these poorer class people, as being children in the way that they don't have that self-respect or that honor that the rich or the wealthy do. Once again, remember, this is all just Balram's perception. It's all told through his voice, through his narrative. So we're understanding the world through his eyes, through his lens. This is his comment as well, his opinion. People in this country are still waiting for the war of their freedom to come from somewhere else. So he claims to be a man of action, and he gets frustrated by how people in his country seem not to be prone to action, seem to be just waiting for things, seem to be an embodiment of inaction, essentially. Inequality and the class divide. He's half-baked. The country's full of people like him, I'll tell you that. And we are entrust our glorious parliamentary democracy. So here we can see the upper classes' condescending attitude towards the lower classes, not really rating them at all. We weren't allowed to inside the mall. Of course, no one had to tell us these things. This is talk about all the drivers when they were taking their masters to the mall. They all wait outside. It wasn't like they were told to wait outside. It's just tradition. It's just customary. It's this unwritten rule, this unwritten law of class divide that establishes that they're not even allowed in a mall. That would be completely against what they need to do. And we see this example is important because it's a manifestation of the class divide. It's not just within someone's head or within their bank balance. We can literally see it now in space. Okay, you are allowed in because you are of this class, and you are not allowed in because of that class. We were like two separate cities, inside and outside the dark egg. I knew I was in the right city, but my father, if he were alive, would be sitting on that pavement. So here we see that, difference between the life Balram is chasing and ultimately attains, theoretically, versus the life that his father had. It's completely two different realities. The roosters in the coop smell the blood from above. They see the organs of their brothers lying around them. They know they're next, yet they do not rebel. They do not try and get out of the coop. So this is the explanation of the metaphor of the roosters in the coop, or the rooster coop, this idea of working class Indian people not rising up or challenging the upper classes, being sort of indoctrinated to believe that this is their life, and they're seeing all the suffering around them, and they know that they're next, yet they don't do anything about it. They're sort of prone to inaction. The trustworthiness of servants is the basis of the entire Indian economy. Quite a statement to be making, but essentially talking about how servants are the foundation of the success of the Indian economy, and the trustworthiness of servants, meaning that masters have trusted their servants, that has actually allowed the Indian economy to be what it is. And so he's showing us how actually working class people are so incredibly important to the Indian economy and to India itself, but it's not recognized at all. And they are not appreciated or in an open way in the slightest. Never before in human history have so few owed so much to so many. A handful of men in this country have trained the remaining 99.9%, as strong, as talented, as intelligent in every way, to exist in perpetual servitude. A servitude so strong you could put a key of his emancipation in a man's hand, and he will throw it back at you with a curse. So pretty self-explanatory over here, showing the mechanics behind the rooster coop and how it is still in existence and how it operates. Only a man who is prepared to see his family destroyed, hunted, beaten, and burned alive by the masters can break out of the coop. That would take no normal human being, but a freak, a pervert of nature. So Balram here referring to himself, sort of, because this is what he's doing. He knows by killing Ashok that Ashok's family is going to retaliate by hurting his family, his relatives. But he makes peace with that idea, and in payment, or like in order for him to pursue a certain type of life. And he understands this is something that is not a normal human being would do, right? A normal human being would continue to live within the constraints of the rooster coop in order to ensure they wouldn't hurt their family, that their family would be all right. Balram recognizes the price he has to pay, and he's willing to pay that price for his success or his individual freedom. See, the poor dream all their lives of getting enough to eat and looking like the rich. And what do the rich dream of? Losing weight and looking like the poor. So here we see the irony of the situation. But of course, the rich have won the war for 10,000 years. That's why one day some wise men, out of compassion for the poor, left them signs and symbols and poems which appear to be about rose and pretty girls and things like that, but when understood correctly, spill out secrets that allow the poorest man on earth to conclude the 10,000-year-old brain war on terms favorable to himself. I just really think this quote's interesting in terms of poetry and writing. But essentially what Balram is saying over here is everything revolves around this class divide, about inequality. For thousands of years, he said, there has been this trend, this tradition, this indoctrination of inequality and keeping certain people down and keeping certain people powerless and voiceless in order to advance the will of the few. And so he's commenting on how writing sort of tells that story, but also just hints at it because this has become so understood within our world that we don't even question it. These people were building homes for the rich, but they lived in tents covered with blue tarpaulin sheets and partitioned into lanes by lines of sewage. So here talking about this complete juxtaposition, the builders who are building the fancy home for the rich in Delhi are living in squalor. So we see that level of inequality. Next, we have the theme of corruption. There is no hospital in Laxmangar, although there are 3 different foundation stones for a hospital laid by 3 different politicians before 3 different elections. So, in Balram's hometown, there isn't even a hospital, but there's all these plans for a hospital. And so we can see that when the politicians are campaigning for the right to lead the people during these democratic elections, they are making all these promises, but they do not deliver. As soon as they get into power, they are fending for themselves. So it's all just a scheme. We may not have sewage, drinking water, and Olympic gold medals, but we do have democracy. So quite a cynical line over there, this idea of democracy. Everyone's really proud they have democracy. And so it's something that, is constantly told to people, you have a voice, you have a vote, but ultimately that's the only thing they have is sort of this idea of democracy. In practice, it's not really working. He had sold our fingerprints, the inky fingerprints which the illiterate person makes on the ballot paper to indicate his vote. So here we can see that democracy is not very carried out in the most it's not carried out in a way of integrity, in a manner of integrity at all. Votes are being sold to people. There's powerful people taking advantage of the voiceless or the powerless. We're driving past Gandhi after having just given a bribe to a minister. It's a joke, isn't it? So this is Ashok commenting on the absurdity of the situation of giving bribes and then driving past Gandhi. So these new politicians who are running the country not aligning with the ideals of Gandhi and what he fought for. The master-servant relationship. This fellow, we can trust him, he's from home. This is Ashok's perspective on Balram. When our masters wanted us, an electric bell began to ring through the quarters. We would rush to a board and find a red light flashing next to the number of the apartment whose servant was needed upstairs. So we can see these servants, their entire lives revolve around their master and their master's needs. Servants need to abuse other servants. Interesting one. But here we see power dynamics. Abuse is usually done because it's this scheme to gaining power. And so servants are in a powerless position all day with their masters, even at night, right? They can just be called by the bell at any time. And so this idea of servants abusing other servants is to have some sort of power or some sort of agency in their lives because they don't have any agency. A servant gets to know his master's intestinal tract, so we get to see this level of closeness that they have, yet this complete disparity in terms of class and reality of life. So close in some ways, on different planets in other ways. I wiped it down thoroughly and scrubbed out every bit of blood and flesh. So this is talking about the hit and run and how Balram is tasked with cleaning up the mess. And so we can see over here, literally and figuratively, he's responsible for clearing up this mess. So we can see that once again, the closeness of the master-servant relationship, this incredible secret, and Balram has this secret, but also that he's going to be blamed for it. You're part of the family. Very, very manipulative idea. This is when they're sitting down with Ashok and his family, and Balram is told that he's part of the family and he's very much cared for. And obviously, the connotation of family is a sense of equality, right? We're all equal, we care for each other, we all take care of each other. But in this case, they're actually going to be blaming this on him. So it's manipulation of this powerful position. And now they're sort of saying this only to prepare Balram to take on this responsibility. So it's manipulative, it's cunning, it's very underhanded to tell him this, because they definitely don't see him as family, and they would treat him, I mean, they are treating him badly. They would send him to jail. That's not something you would do to your family. That I was alone in the car and alone responsible for all that had happened. So this is the claim that he's supposed to take on as a supposed member of this family. So master-servant relationship extends far beyond, okay, here's your paycheck, you do a certain amount of work. We see that his job description is very, very wide. He literally does, whatever they ask him to do. Nothing seems to be off limits, even going to jail for them. And we get a letter from his grandmother, who buys into the system and says she's so proud of you for doing this. She's agreed to be a witness to the confession as well. So we see this whole sort of corruption scheme in the master-servant relationship, and just the influence of the powerful over the powerless. The jails of Delhi are full of drivers who are there behind bars because they are taking the blame for their good, solid, middle-class masters. Doesn't the driver's family protest? Far from it. They would actually go about bragging. Their boy Balram had taken the fall, gone to Tihar jail for his employer. He was loyal as a dog. He was the perfect servant. So this is not something just one instance out of none. This is not like an exceptional situation. This is this institutionalized idea of taking the hit for your master and being that loyal and that subservient. When the master's life is in chaos, so is the servant. So we see the closeness once again. Do we loathe our masters behind a facade of love, or do we love them behind a facade of loathing? We are made mysterious to ourselves by the rooster coop we are locked in. So we see all of his reflections that Balram has. He's a very deep thinker. Once again, I was only the driver. Once again, I was only the eavesdropper. So at some points, he feels like he really does connect with Ashok, and he sees his humanity to have conversations, but then immediately afterwards, he goes back to just being the driver, just eavesdropping, just being on the periphery, not actually being involved in the conversation or involved in what's going on. While on the other hand, you can get typhoid from bad water. Lost actually for no reason, you get into an accident, plenty of worst case scenarios. So just talking about how servants' lives, they're sort of grateful for having a master and for doing these things because the alternatives could be worse. The more I stole from him, the more I realized how much he had stolen from me. So this is when he starts stealing from Ashok, and we can see that he's not just talking about money over here. He's realizing the agency and the power that Ashok has stolen from him. Ashok as a symbol or as an emblem of this system of inequality that is pervasive. Entrepreneurship and social mobility. You Chinese are so far ahead of us in every respect, except you don't have entrepreneurs. So this is the perspective of Balram, and obviously he is talking to the Chinese premier this entire book. The Indian entrepreneur has to be straight and crooked. So we see a paradox over there, contradiction. I absorbed everything. That's the amazing thing about entrepreneurs. We are like sponges. We absorb and grow. And we see that true of Balram. He's an observer, he's a listener, and he takes all of that on board in order to become successful. And we see a great business idea over here. I bought my first toothpaste that night. I got it from the man who usually sold me pan. He had a side business toothpaste that cancelled out the effects of pan. So the same man selling the thing that's going to ruin your teeth is also selling the solution. And so here we have an example of entrepreneurship aside from the obvious example of Balram's entrepreneurship taxi company that comes about later in the story. Next, we have globalization, and this is what allows Balram to set up his business in Bangalore, have set up all these outsourcing companies that virtually run America now. It is almost 3 a.m. This is when Bangalore comes to life. The American workday is coming to an end and mine is beginning in earnest. So he's always writing at odd times of the evening because it's a very nocturnal place, Bangalore, working for the American companies. And so we see globalization, how the world has expanded, that within one country, you're working actually for businesses that are operating in another country. And we can also see how Balram takes advantage of that. He takes advantage of whatever opportunity he is presented with. Violence and moral ambiguity. I ran the bottle down, so this describing the killing of Ashok. His family is going to do such terrible things to my family. I was just getting my revenge in advance, so this is justification of his actions. I pulled out all the stickers of the goddess and threw them on Mr. Ashok's body, just in case they'd help his soul go to heaven. So this moral ambiguity, he's just killed this man, but yet he wants him to go to heaven, and he puts these stickers of the goddess on him. And we can see this in a bunch of different ways, interpreted in a variety of ways. I think one of the interesting ways to interpret it is that Ashok, he actually does like Ashok. Ashok is symbolic of this system, and he needs to do away with him in order to start this new life. So he sort of becomes this obstacle in his way. So you can interpret it in a variety of ways, but I think that's an interesting one to consider. Freedom and individualism. I've got no family anymore. All I've got is chandeliers. So the theme is freedom, but it's almost the price of freedom, and how he's left in isolation. The price of his success is his family, is his like real connections. Obviously, he has lots of business connections and connections to people in power now, but his connection to his family, to his upbringing, to people, to humanity. He lives a very isolated and lonely life now that he's done this crime, but also because of the effects of that. And so all I've got is chandeliers, and it's up to you to decide whether you think he's happy with that decision or not. He seems to be, not happy necessarily, but he seems to be thriving in his new environment. He has achieved what he wanted to achieve. So maybe he doesn't claim to have regret. Maybe he has a little bit, but he doesn't seem to mind that he's surrounded by chandeliers. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found the video helpful. As I said, it's not all the quotations, and this is just sort of my interpretation of some of the key ones. You can interpret it in a variety of ways, but I hope that you found some key quotes to assist you in writing your essay. Please remember to like the video and to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.